You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. Life inevitably teaches us that people come into our lives and eventually leave. We forge connections with others, creating bonds that often become intertwined with our emotions. But when those connections unravel, it leaves us wondering, how do we cope with the emotional aftermath when someone no longer shares a part in our story? Or when we come to terms with the reality that their emotional involvement was never as deep as ours? In moments like these, you might find yourself pondering, how can I stop caring? Or is it possible to let go emotionally and still remain true to who I am? This is where Stoicism, and specifically the timeless wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, offers valuable guidance. The Stoics did not seek to suppress emotions. Instead, they learned how to master them by recognizing their transient nature and allowing them to hold less sway over our lives. Emotional detachment, according to Stoic principles, doesn't mean becoming emotionally detached or unfeeling. It means regaining control over how we react and responding with mental clarity and peace of mind. In this guide, we'll delve into 5 powerful Stoic strategies on how to emotionally distance oneself from someone, using the teachings of Marcus Aurelius to illuminate the path. These aren't just lofty philosophical ideals, but practical principles designed to help transform the way we interact with others and protect our inner balance. Remember, as Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. By embracing these rules, we gain the strength to cultivate emotional resilience while fostering healthier, more grounded relationships with both others and ourselves. Chapter 1. Understand the impermanence of life. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. When it comes to emotional attachments, we often cling to our personal perspective of someone, a narrative we create about their importance in our lives. But the reality is that all relationships are transient. One moment you're close, the next they're gone, whether through distance, death, or the slow fade of intimacy. People leave. It may seem bleak, but this is the Stoics' first rule of detachment. Embrace impermanence. When you realize that no connection is permanent, you become more conscious of the present. Have you ever tried holding onto a handful of sand at the beach? The tighter you squeeze, the quicker it slips away. This is a natural law of life. The more we try to possess something or someone, the faster they fade. In my own experience, I had a friendship that spanned over 10 years. We shared everything: dreams, fears, late-night conversations. Yet over time, things changed. As much as I resisted, the distance between us grew. The emotional investment I had made felt like a chain holding me to someone who no longer reciprocated the same connection. It wasn't until I accepted that the friendship had run its course that I could finally release that emotional weight. Marcus Aurelius would have advised the same: accept that things will end, and you will suffer less when they do. Chapter 2. The first rule of detachment. Embrace impermanence. Human relationships have a way of consuming us. We invest so much of ourselves building connections that feel, at times, indispensable to our sense of identity. We cherish them, celebrate them, and weave them into the very fabric of our lives. But as Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you have been a citizen in this great city for a little while. Now go, and you have the will and the time to choose the path with respect. All too often, however, the reality sets in. People, as much as they might matter to us, are not ours to keep forever. Life is fluid, people change, and relationships, no matter how deep or enduring they may seem, are, in the end, transient. One moment they're close, the next, they're gone, whether through the gradual drift of time, the pain of distance, or even the inevitable arrival of death. This fleeting nature of connection is what the Stoics deeply understood. For them, this was the first rule of emotional detachment: to embrace impermanence. In a world where impermanence is the only constant, understanding that all connections are temporary can bring surprising peace. This acceptance doesn't diminish the value of relationships, but helps us live more freely within them. As Heraclitus once noted, You cannot step into the same river twice, highlighting the ever-changing nature of life itself. When you come to accept that all things, and by extension all relationships, are subject to change, you free yourself from the burden of holding on. Instead of desperately clinging to things that aren't meant to remain, you can allow them to flow through your life and cherish their presence while they last. Consider the metaphor of holding sand at the beach. Imagine gripping a fistful of it in your palm, trying to capture it. The harder you try, the quicker it slips away. It's a physical law of nature. Resistance speeds up loss. Similarly, in our emotional lives, the more tightly we grasp onto someone or something, the more fleeting its presence becomes. The things we love tell us what we are, said Thomas Aquinas, but when we try to trap those things, we risk distorting the natural flow of our connection with them. Stoicism teaches us that by accepting the impermanence of relationships, we soften our grip and learn to appreciate people for who they are in the moment, not for what we want them to be for us indefinitely. This truth was powerfully illustrated in my own life through a friendship that spanned over a decade. We shared everything: dreams, fears, late-night conversations, and countless memories. Together, we weathered highs and lows, and I believed, deeply, that this friendship would endure through any storm. But as time wore on, subtle changes began to surface. Communication became sparse. Interests diverged. It wasn't dramatic. No loud fights, no open breakups, just a gradual fading of connection. And as much as I resisted it, the distance grew. I had invested so much emotionally into this relationship. It felt like I was chained to someone who, it seemed, was no longer emotionally available to meet me halfway. I wasn't ready to let go. Yet, I couldn't ignore that the friendship I'd once cherished had become something different, something I was struggling to hold on to, despite the fact that the bond itself had shifted into something less meaningful. Marcus Aurelius would have called this an opportunity to practice detachment. In his writings, he urged us, remember that very little is needed to make a happy life. And in those moments of despair, where I couldn't reconcile my expectations with the reality of the situation, I felt the weight of those words deeply. My emotional attachment was clouding my ability to find peace. I realized I was holding on to the idea of the relationship, not the actual relationship itself. When I finally surrendered to the reality that this chapter was closing, the burden of carrying that emotional weight began to lift. Accepting that the friendship had served its purpose helped me find closure, not in the form of resentment, but in the quiet understanding that people come into our lives with purpose and leave when their time has passed. The absence of my friend no longer felt like loss. Instead, it became a part of my personal evolution, an opportunity to make space for other relationships, or, perhaps more importantly, for self-reflection. Stoicism isn't about detaching from others emotionally in a cold, distant way. It's about learning to adjust our expectations and accepting the ebb and flow of life's changes. As Marcus Aurelius so wisely taught, what doesn't benefit the hive benefits the bee. Holding on to something that no longer serves its true purpose doesn't benefit either party involved. This realization gave me the freedom to accept that not all relationships are meant to last forever, and that was perfectly okay. By embracing the truth that nothing is permanent, we learn to act not out of desperation but from a place of awareness and acceptance. It doesn't mean we stop loving or stop investing. It simply means we no longer hang our entire sense of well-being on something that may not stay the same. In the acceptance of impermanence, we liberate ourselves from suffering, finding joy in the connections that exist in the present, without the desperate need for them to exist forever. As I came to embrace the transience of that friendship, I realized that Marcus Aurelius' wisdom wasn't merely an abstract idea, it was a way to truly live. Loss is nothing else but change, he wrote. And when we can view it through this lens, we find that change is not something to fear but a chance to grow, adapt, and make space for new experiences, relationships, and growth. Rule 3. Practice negative visualization. At first glance, the concept of negative visualization may seem counterproductive, even uncomfortable. Why, you may ask, would anyone choose to deliberately imagine the possibility of loss? Shouldn't we focus on the positive, on what is right in front of us? As Viktor Frankl, the renowned psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." Negative visualization, however, is not a morbid exercise in anticipating misery, but rather a powerful and essential tool for emotional detachment, resilience, and understanding. The central idea behind negative visualization is deceptively simple. By picturing the worst-case scenario before it happens, we prepare ourselves emotionally for potential loss and, as a result, lessen the severity of that loss when it becomes a reality. Far from hardening our hearts, this practice strengthens them. We don't shut down our feelings, but rather cultivate the emotional flexibility to handle life's inevitable changes. In fact, this practice can help us respond with greater composure and clarity, instead of succumbing to shock and despair when the unexpected happens. As Marcus Aurelius himself wrote in his Meditations, do not disturb yourself by imagining the whole of your life's troubles at once. Rather, as each arises, meet it with calmness and self-control. The wisdom in this statement is in its invitation to face the troubles of life one moment at a time, not to catastrophize the future. However, negative visualization offers us a way to do just that in smaller, more controlled doses. By imagining potential setbacks or losses in advance, we emotionally prepare ourselves without allowing those thoughts to overwhelm us. It's a paradox. By confronting our deepest fears in a safe, mental space, we remove their power over us when they manifest in the real world. Consider the act of imagining a life without someone you love, a close friend, a family member, or a partner. Picture for a moment that person is no longer there to share in your daily routines, no longer an integral part of your world. You might begin to feel the discomfort, the sharp pang of fear, or even a deep sense of grief. But this emotional discomfort is exactly what we're trying to cultivate. It's not to make you anxious or upset, but rather to gently introduce you to the reality that loss is a part of life. By experiencing the emotion of loss within the safety of our minds, we can inoculate ourselves against its unexpected arrival when it happens in reality. It's an exercise in resilience, and over time, negative visualization builds a reserve of emotional strength. It transforms vulnerability into adaptability. The philosopher Seneca echoed this sentiment when he remarked, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." When we imagine the worst, we often realize we can withstand far more than we thought. But just as we wouldn't run a marathon without gradually building up our endurance, we can't cultivate the necessary emotional strength for life's inevitable losses without mentally preparing for them in advance. I remember a specific period in my own life when this practice became my refuge. A close friend of mine was considering moving overseas for a job opportunity. The idea of them being on the other side of the world was a thought I could hardly bear. The daily conversations we shared, the weekend plans, and the simple joy of their presence, these things made our friendship a cornerstone of my emotional world. The mere thought of life without them caused a wave of dread to settle in. I wanted to ignore it, to pretend that everything would stay exactly the same, but I knew that wasn't a realistic option. Instead of avoiding these feelings of dread, I leaned into them. I consciously visualized a life where my best friend no longer lived nearby. I mentally pictured myself waking up without them in my daily routine, having to face weekends alone, without our familiar exchanges. I sat with that discomfort, letting the sadness wash over me, not to dwell in it, but to understand it. I asked myself, how would I cope with this reality? I imagined what it would take to maintain my emotional equilibrium despite the absence. I also visualized new ways to find joy, new avenues for deepening other friendships, and activities that would fill the space left behind. I found a sense of peace in knowing that, although this change would be painful, it wasn't the end of the world. I also began to find solace in other aspects of my life, realizing that while no one is irreplaceable, the strength to cope with the loss lies within me. When the time came for my friend to leave and settle overseas, the emotional weight of the situation didn't blindside me. Yes, there was still sadness, but the grief wasn't paralyzing. It wasn't a complete rupture, but rather a transition. Because I had prepared my heart and mind, I was able to meet the change with a sense of balance. The reality of their departure wasn't as crushing as the imagined loss had initially felt, and because I had faced that pain beforehand, I felt a quiet strength in accepting the shift with grace. Marcus Aurelius, in his reflections, often reminded himself to look to the gods and accept things as they are. This perspective isn't one of detachment in the cold sense, but of acceptance. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Negative visualization teaches us just that. By acknowledging the possibilities of pain and loss before they strike, we reclaim our power. We are no longer subject to life's circumstances in a passive way. Instead, we choose to face life with preparedness, knowing we will endure. And in doing so, we free ourselves from the deep, unwelcome shock of unforeseen loss. By practicing negative visualization, we not only prepare for potential hardships, but also build the emotional resilience to face whatever challenges life may bring. This exercise transforms the way we perceive loss, turning fear into understanding and making space for the quiet wisdom of accepting change. As we ready ourselves to embrace impermanence, we allow life to unfold without attachment, opening the door to more profound growth and stronger emotional connections. Chapter Rule 4. Focus on what you can control. One of the fundamental tenets of Stoicism revolves around understanding the profound difference between what is within our control and what is not. As we navigate relationships, one of the most difficult and painful realizations we can make is how often we entangle ourselves in situations we can't change, desperately trying to control what is, in essence, uncontrollable. The Stoics teach us that emotional freedom and peace stem from focusing solely on what lies within our power and accepting what lies outside it. For emotional detachment to become a skill we master, this distinction is not merely helpful, but essential. To truly release the emotional weight we carry in our relationships, we must learn to let go of the uncontrollable. As Marcus Aurelius famously stated, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This quote offers us a profound insight into the Stoic mindset. Obstacles aren't simply setbacks to be avoided, they are opportunities to grow and advance. In relationships, the obstacles we face often revolve around our desire to control others. We may wish to manipulate feelings, change behaviors, or elicit certain responses from those we care about. However, the bitter truth we must confront is this: you cannot control other people's feelings, only your own. This is the essence of Stoic practice, to focus inward. We cannot make others feel what we want them to feel, just as we can't make someone act in accordance with our desires or preferences. This realization is at the heart of emotional detachment because it allows us to draw a boundary, one that keeps us from giving away our emotional energy to things beyond our grasp. What stands in the way becomes the way, Marcus Aurelius reminds us again. The way here is to accept what we cannot change, and instead channel our energy toward things we can control: our reactions, our responses, and our emotional state. In every relationship, there comes a time when we might find ourselves trying to influence someone else's emotions. Perhaps you've bent over backward to win their affection or earn their approval. You might have tried everything, from grand gestures to subtle hints, hoping they would notice or feel the way you did. But how did it feel? Ultimately, this exercise in external control often leads to frustration and exhaustion. There is no satisfaction in forcing an emotional bond that isn't shared, and certainly no peace when the love or appreciation you hope to elicit remains elusive. The pursuit of someone else's affection through manipulative or controlling tactics rarely leads to fulfillment. It only magnifies feelings of helplessness. As the philosopher Epictetus wisely said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Let us pause here for a moment of reflection. Recall a time in your life when you tried to influence another's feelings. Perhaps it was a partner, a friend, or a family member. You may have put in long hours, invested emotional energy, and given more of yourself than felt reasonable. But despite all of this, did you feel a sense of control or relief? Did you feel empowered or enslaved to their response? If you're like many, the answer is probably somewhere between frustration and futility. This is precisely why focusing on what we can control is so liberating. We are not tasked with changing the hearts or minds of others. Instead, we are invited to work on what is ours alone to manage: our own actions, thoughts, and emotions. To free ourselves from unnecessary emotional turmoil, we must redirect our attention to the one area of our lives we always have control over: ourselves. When we do so, we reclaim our power and shift our focus away from external expectations. The change may seem small, but the difference it can make is profound. Rather than agonizing over how another person responds to us, we focus on how we respond to them. We focus on our own internal landscape, how we manage disappointment, how we define our sense of self-worth, how we communicate our feelings honestly without expecting another person to carry that burden for us. A wise application of this practice occurred in my own life during a challenging period in a romantic relationship. Like many, I found myself caught in a cycle of needing my partner to demonstrate care in ways that I imagined were the only appropriate expressions of love. I wished for validation through constant reassurance, through the exact words or gestures I envisioned in my mind. When I did not receive what I desired, it left me feeling distant and unappreciated. The more I struggled to shape my partner's actions, the more I alienated myself from any sense of emotional peace. One day, I stumbled upon Marcus Aurelius' words: "How much time you are going to waste on vain things? How much of your life will be stolen by being too concerned with other people's opinions?" In that moment, a shift occurred in me. Instead of focusing on my partner's behavior, I began to center my attention on my own actions and emotional responses. I examined how I communicated, how I respected boundaries, and how I expressed my needs. I allowed myself to focus solely on how I could better show up in the relationship, independent of my partner's responses. While this shift didn't change everything overnight, it brought me inner peace. And perhaps more importantly, it paved the way for a healthier relationship because it was grounded in two people who chose to take responsibility for their own emotional well-being, free from the burden of trying to control one another. The Stoics continuously stress the importance of focusing on that which we can influence rather than wasting energy on that which lies beyond our power. This echoes the central lesson in Epictetus' philosophy: freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. When we place our emotional security in the hands of another person, whether that's in the form of affection, admiration, or validation, we hand over our power. But when we take responsibility for our emotional life, we reclaim it. By focusing on what we can control, we stop seeking external validation and instead build an unshakable foundation of internal peace. We are no longer dependent on someone else's response to dictate our happiness or our worth. We are free to move through the world with the clarity, resilience, and self-sufficiency that Stoic philosophy encourages. As we draw on the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and countless other Stoic thinkers, we come to understand that our emotional state is ultimately the most important thing we have to manage. No one can take that from us unless we allow them to. Our reactions, our actions, our beliefs, these are the things that truly lie within our control. By mastering this art, we are able to detach emotionally not out of coldness, but from a place of strength, clarity, and true independence. This, as the Stoics show us, is the ultimate freedom chapter. Rule 5. Reflect on the bigger picture. It's so easy to become swallowed by the storm of emotions that arise when we're deeply invested in a relationship, whether it's a romantic one, a friendship, or even family dynamics. The intensity of the emotional turbulence in the present can make everything feel monumental. Yet, one of the core principles of Stoicism teaches us a simple but incredibly powerful remedy for emotional entanglement: perspective. Stoics recognize that many of the things that feel all-consuming in the moment are temporary, and by broadening our focus, we can loosen the grip that emotions have on us. Through this wider lens, we see that life continues beyond the pains of today. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most reflective Stoic philosophers, often stressed the transient nature of human troubles. As he once wrote, "Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now, take what's left and live it properly." This perspective, almost paradoxical in its clarity, was not meant to be grim, but rather a wake-up call to remind us how brief our existence is, how fleeting our troubles. The vastness of time in the context of our lives can sometimes be overwhelming, but when viewed properly, it provides immense relief. His insight encourages us to step back and remember that any suffering or frustration we are feeling is just a speck in the grand design of the world. One simple question can help you do this. Will this pain matter in 5 years? It may sound simplistic, but it's a profound tool for emotional detachment. Take a moment and reflect. Will the argument you had with a friend or the heartbreak from a partner's departure still sting as much in half a decade? The pain you feel right now seems unbearable, perhaps world-shattering, but when viewed from the vantage point of time, it becomes evident that the heartache and drama you're immersed in today are likely to fade into the distant past. This doesn't make the pain less real, it just frames it in the light of impermanence. This realization is essential when we're looking to detach emotionally. We so often make the mistake of equating the present emotional storm with the entirety of our lives, neglecting the fact that, as the Roman Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Our ability to shift our emotional focus from the turmoil at hand to a more expansive view is the essence of true emotional mastery. The grief of today will not define who you are tomorrow, and it's critical to recognize that. Several years ago, I found myself consumed with heartache after the end of a significant relationship. During that time, it was difficult to imagine a future where I wasn't in pain. My world felt unrecognizable, and the thought of moving forward seemed impossible. I couldn't picture how I could ever see beyond the situation. I was emotionally entangled in the present, completely absorbed by the intensity of the sorrow, the disappointment, and the resentment. Every moment felt amplified, and it seemed like the pain would last forever. It was at this point that I returned to the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, who observed, "Time is a river that carries me along, but I am the riverbed that shapes its course." His words, though simple, hit home. The clarity of his insight allowed me to confront a painful truth. My present feelings, no matter how intensely real they felt, were just a chapter in my larger story. In a sense, adopting this broader perspective didn't immediately take the pain away. Rather, it made the present discomfort feel less overwhelming because I was able to shift away from "I'm drowning in emotion right now" to "this is part of a larger story and will eventually be a distant memory." By looking at the bigger picture, I was freed from feeling trapped in an emotional prison. In this grand scheme of life, as fleeting as each moment may feel in the heat of its intensity, everything shifts and moves, just as the seasons change. I, too, would shift. As we embrace this Stoic rule, the emotional fog that grips us in the moment slowly begins to lift, revealing the path forward. The ancient philosopher Seneca gave similar advice when he said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." How many times have we been caught in emotional turbulence, imagining the worst, and exaggerating the significance of a painful event to the point where we convince ourselves it defines us? Yet, with perspective, we come to understand that this pain is but one small part of a much larger and unfolding journey. It helps to keep a more expansive view, not only of time, but of our emotions within that time. Life itself offers a multitude of experiences, and while every emotional episode feels consuming at the time, it will not be long before new experiences replace it. Thus, holding on to the notion that this too shall pass is not just comforting, but profoundly liberating. When we examine the bigger picture, we gain the power to reframe the intensity of pain. It loses its grip on us because we begin to understand that nothing lasts forever, not joy, nor sorrow, nor love. A clear example of this could be seen in how we process grief or disappointment. At the time, we may see it as all-consuming, thinking this will never end. I can't move forward. But once we gain some distance, when months or years pass, we realize that the emotional intensity we felt was but one chapter of the broader narrative of our lives. In fact, in time, these chapters can serve as profound learning experiences that shape who we are. This doesn't imply that emotional discomfort or heartache is unimportant. It is simply reframing the way we approach it. The turbulence may still stir, but by seeing it as part of the flowing river of time, we regain peace. What stands in the way becomes the way, said Marcus Aurelius. What seems like an insurmountable emotional obstacle in the moment, whether heartbreak, betrayal, or a simple misunderstanding, becomes an opportunity for inner transformation when we take a step back. The more you incorporate this technique of zooming out, stepping away from the present emotional uproar, the more natural it becomes to detach from it. This process gradually lessens the power that your immediate circumstances hold over you. As Viktor Frankl wisely put it, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. The broader we cast our mental nets, the larger our personal space becomes to breathe, adjust, and release any tension. Thus, when your emotions are weighing heavily on you and you feel overwhelmed by the intensity of a relationship, pause and ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years? Will the pain of today be a distant memory in the grand scheme of things? When you give yourself the space to contemplate the broader context of your emotions and experiences, you free yourself. You move away from the narrative of tragedy into a broader reality, one in which the current situation is no longer the defining moment of your entire story. This practice not only grounds us in the present, but also creates the emotional distance needed to detach with clarity and grace. Reflect on the bigger picture, and the present emotional weight becomes lighter. You become the riverbed, not at the mercy of the river's currents, but guiding them forward. Conclusion: the path to emotional freedom. Emotional detachment, when properly understood, is far from the cold, indifferent state that it's often mistaken for. It is not about building walls around yourself or shutting off your feelings like a dam holding back a river of emotion. Instead, it is a refined practice, a steady journey toward cultivating inner resilience and mastery over your emotional world. To the Stoics, this journey isn't about the elimination of emotions, but about responding to life's inevitable waves with clarity, understanding, and power. As Marcus Aurelius reminds us in his Meditations, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Emotional detachment, therefore, is the process of refining our thoughts and responses, choosing how we engage with life's ups and downs rather than being swept away by them. It's about freeing yourself from the grip of fleeting feelings and understanding that you have the power to control how deeply they affect you. The Stoics teach us to embrace impermanence as a vital part of human existence. Everything in life is in a constant state of flux. This is not an abstract philosophical notion, but a raw, inevitable reality. As the Stoic Epictetus said, the greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it. Skillful pilots gain their reputation from storms and tempests. By accepting the impermanent nature of things, you loosen your attachment to them, allowing you to meet each moment with a tranquil, adaptable mind. To attach to something fleeting is to live with an ever-present undercurrent of fear, the fear that it will one day be lost. But to release this attachment brings freedom, for we know the nature of life is always changing. As you detach, you do not strip yourself of emotion. Rather, you practice guiding your emotional landscape with rational thought and awareness. This is why we focus on cultivating emotional mastery, understanding that while we can't control all of life's external factors, we always have control over how we respond. To practice emotional regulation is not to banish your feelings. It is to acknowledge them, recognize their root causes, and choose responses that serve your greater peace. Negative visualization, at first glance, might seem like an invitation to worry. Why imagine the worst? But when we engage in this practice, we prepare ourselves not by instilling fear, but by softening the blow of potential loss. We learn, as Marcus Aurelius wisely stated, do not disturb yourself by imagining the whole of your life's troubles at once. Rather, as each arises, meet it with calmness and self-control. In this way, negative visualization acts like an emotional buffer, making the storm less terrifying when it actually arrives. Life is filled with loss, of loved ones, of opportunities, of dreams, but by preemptively reflecting on those losses, we bolster our strength, fortifying our heart and mind to endure what may come without feeling totally consumed by it. This leads naturally into focusing on what is within our control. The Stoics were acutely aware of how much energy is wasted in trying to control things beyond our grasp. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, said Marcus Aurelius. Whether it's trying to change another person's feelings or obsessing over outcomes you cannot influence, emotional attachment to the uncontrollable only fuels our suffering. When you relinquish your need to control what lies outside your reach, you free yourself from frustration and the emotional distress of unmet expectations. In your relationships, in your career, or in the most intimate corners of your soul, what matters most is not forcing the world to behave according to your desires, but rather, mastering how you respond. By focusing on your thoughts, your actions, and your personal integrity, you return the power to where it truly belongs, within. Finally, one of the most effective tools in emotional detachment is perspective. When life narrows down into sharp emotional focus, we tend to lose sight of the bigger picture. Our pain, our attachment, becomes everything. However, as the Stoics teach, seeing beyond the immediate to the infinite sweep of time and the larger tapestry of life is a salve for the hurt. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, how much time we waste in suffering when we could just ask ourselves, what does this pain mean in the grand scheme of things? It reminds us to ask the critical question, will this distress matter in a few years? This helps shift from a place of intense emotional contraction to one of expansive understanding. The ability to zoom out, to step beyond your own personal struggle, isn't a strategy for denial or avoidance. It's a practice in self-liberation, reminding yourself that nothing is permanent. The pain of today is temporary, and tomorrow will offer new experiences, new learnings, and perhaps even new forms of joy. Nothing that afflicts us emotionally truly defines us, unless we allow it to. This is where true emotional detachment blossoms, not in cutting ties with feelings, but in recognizing that they come and go as naturally as the tides. As you journey into your own path of emotional detachment, ask yourself, am I adhering to the principles that lead to true emotional freedom? Every moment that we allow ourselves to grasp too tightly, to control, to be possessed by our attachments, we lose a little piece of peace. Emotional freedom doesn't happen instantly or without effort. It is the result of daily practice, of internal reflection, and a commitment to living according to our higher self, not reactive impulses. The Stoic approach does not promise an instant fix for heartache, nor does it offer shortcuts. But it offers clarity, a path toward emotional strength that grows with us. In accepting life's inevitable changes with calm acceptance, in recognizing the power we hold over our responses, and in understanding that emotional freedom is found not through avoidance, but through thoughtful engagement, we release unnecessary suffering and embrace a richer, more liberated life. So, the next time you feel yourself clinging to a person, a moment, or a desire that threatens your emotional peace, ask yourself, am I living in alignment with the principles of Stoic detachment? The path isn't always easy, but it leads to the profound wisdom of knowing that we are not defined by the objects of our attachment. We are defined by the strength of our inner peace, our resilience, and our capacity to respond with clarity, wisdom, and strength. Through this practice, you not only learn how to detach emotionally, you learn how to navigate life as it comes, unshaken and free.